thanks for joining us. We have a really special panel here today. Unleash the Beast was all about getting better mental health outcomes for the community, and Unleash the Beast brought together a whole wide variety of people talking about a whole wide variety of issues. But something really close to my heart is social enterprise and how social enterprise can help change the world. And we are very fortunate to have a panel stack full of people that are not just living and breathing social enterprise, but are making a change right here in our community, but right across Queensland and Australia as well. So it's quite a privilege to be able to welcome everyone here today. And I'll start in, what is this? It's not chronological order. We'll start in couch order. We'll start in couch order. And with Jen, Luke, Louise and Ali. And what I might start off by doing is actually asking them in 30 seconds or less just to name, details and really quickly your particular social enterprise to get it started.
But Dave, before we do that, how did you get involved? Like, why do you love social enterprise? Like, what's your favourite social enterprise?
I love leading questions, Luke. Thank you. So, I am a member of Parliament, but before that, I was working.
Is that a good job or?
It's a great job.
Yeah, thanks.
But I'm interviewing you, Luke.
Sorry.
I was working as a lawyer, and lawyering can be really, really dull. And I was involved in a couple of great community organisations around Toowoomba. But I started a friendship with this bright young guy who was idealistic and a little naive even, Luke Terry. And he was starting a social enterprise called Vanguard Laundry. And I don't know why, I think we just had a couple of coffees one day and I was like, this is the kind of work I want to do. Life-changing work. Where you can really see a difference and where a government dollar goes a very long way if spent correctly. So I was a founding director on the Vanguard Laundry, and I found myself doing a whole bunch of really interesting things a couple of years ago. For instance, interviewing and assessing the best particular piece of laundry equipment, whether it be from Spain or Germany or wherever else, Denmark. But it was an extraordinary thing. I went and then got involved in politics and sadly had to resign from the Vanguard Laundry Board. But I'm a convert. I'm an absolute convert. And for me, at a time when the government, when government dollars, state, federal, regardless of party affiliation, when they're running out of money and finding it hard to identify which projects to support, governments should support social enterprise. So that's why I'm here, Luke.
Thanks.
As you know very, very well. So I'm going to go back to my question now. In 30 seconds or less, can you quickly tell us where you come from and your particular social enterprise?
Yeah, so my name's Jen Shaw. I'm the founder of Emerge, which is a social enterprise for youth between the ages of 16 and 25 who are homeless, at risk of homelessness or significant disadvantage. We operate a youth drop-in centre and run mentoring programs and resources for young people, but we do run a hospitality arm, which is all about giving young people training in hospitality and life skills and eventual employment as well.
Fantastic. Luke? 30 seconds or less.
I'm a social entrepreneur.
Take note.
I've been building social enterprises since my early 20s, and I just love this idea of building community centres and non-profits that can be funded by the markets. So how we can solve complex social problems by using business as the main tool. And so I founded with the community and people like yourself, Dave, a very large laundry called Vanguard Laundry Service in Toowoomba that today has 70 people on the payroll, the majority of which have a lived experience of mental illness and are transitioning back to other mainstream work. Was involved in the establishment of Ability Enterprises, which Louise will tell us a little bit about later on, and a prison program down the road called Work Restart, and now like a very exciting project called White Box, which we started to launch in Parliament last year, which was around how we can support people around this sofa to be funded to go and set up their own projects that create large-scale, sustainable social enterprises that pay people that are really disadvantaged in our community full, open award wages.
A minute, but that's great.
You were over that.
Louise.
So Louise Noble, and I'm the founder of the Mulberry Project. So the Mulberry Project basically turns underutilised farmland into market gardens to create opportunities for training and employment for people from refugee and migrant backgrounds. So we're working now in collaboration with the Anglican Church down at Allora, developing a 10-acre site, and also with Mercy Community here in Toowoomba at their site at Rangeville. So farming and food and employment pathways. Yeah.
Excellent.
Ali Martell, and I'm writing a biography about a woman who was born 120 years ago. She was a very giving, generous person, so it's only natural that the proceeds from my book should go to something that meant a lot to her, and that's health services in Papua New Guinea through the YWAM medical ships. So it's just a bit different. I'm donating the proceeds from this book and a lot of my time, and then there is the possibility, we hope, of a film, and the film will also go towards these health services. But in addition to that, the film is a way of helping to develop a film industry, we hope, in Papua New Guinea.
Fantastic. Well, as you can see, there's a wide variety of experiences across the board here. Now, I always find the most interesting questions to hear the answers to from all of you is sometimes not the what or the where or the when, but the why. So can you share with us why? Why have you ended up where you have now, and why you think social enterprise can help change the world?
Me?
We don't need to do it in order, but why don't we start? Jen,
Okay.
please, because Jen's got an extraordinary personal story as well.
I guess my why, it does come down to a personal story. I was a young homeless street kid right here in Toowoomba many, many years ago. And it was, I'd done all the traditional, conventional ways of getting my life back on track, counsellors, psychologists and things like that, all of which are really important. But for me, it's not, it didn't inspire me to become a better person. I had a lot of mentors come into my life, and I was saying before, I got taken out west doing cotton chipping and out-of-the-box ideas, a lot of Indigenous mentorship around me as well. So it was through those ideas and people around me who gave me a second, third, fourth, sometimes a fifth chance that really helped me get my life back on track. I've always loved to cook. Hospitality was always in my blood. Everywhere I went, I was always making beautiful meals out of not much at all. And that was my gift. And I had some mentors in my older years who said, you've got this beautiful gift of creating food. And I've, was able to use that to reach other people. We started doing projects with people at low socioeconomic backgrounds, doing cooking workshops, and I found that you could really connect with people through food. So it just made sense, through this journey to bring together my love of food, my love of helping people, and building Emerge that way. But we see kids all the time come into our kitchen, and they may not want to talk to us, but if we can get in the kitchen and start cooking with them, then it opens up a conversation. So
that's a deeply personal experience for you. Luke, you started very early on trying to organise businesses. Tell us a bit about that.
I grew up I was the son of a preacher. It's always a way to start a story, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah.
And I wanted to my dad wanted me to be a preacher as well, and I didn't. And I went to the careers advisor in grade 11, and I said, I want to do something a bit social and a bit business. And in the 1990s, they advised me around funeral directing. Anyway, I didn't go there. But I left school.
It's a guaranteed clientele.
And we might get into it one day. It's another story. But I studied business and marketing. I did a lot of social stuff. Worked very much in King's Cross with Wayside Chapel and a couple of other charities called Hope Street. Set up my first social enterprise with my sister on a housing estate in Sydney, and then found this amazing job in London, and which was around I was given a budget. And this is very much what I preach this story. Not preach, what I tell this story.
Dad will be proud.
Dad's going to be happy. My wage was paid, and I was given a budget to go and set up as many social enterprises that we could as a team that would create employment for people with a lived experience of mental illness, bring in the right team and skills, get the anchor contracts to make that successful. Ended up back in Australia where there were no social enterprise jobs back in 2009, 2010. And I think, especially in a mental health space and a homelessness space, and Dave, you must go to all these forums all the time, and we hear about we need more nurses on the ward, or we need more community service, and all the different things that we need. But whenever, especially if you watch, a 7:30 report or whatever it is, you always hear people, when you're hearing reports of suicide and how that really hit that community, you always hear an uncle or an auntie or a father or a parent or someone saying, if only they had the opportunity to get that first start at a job. Like, it always comes up around employment. And I don't think we've gotten very good in Australia around solving that problem yet. And I know with my time at Toowoomba Clubhouse and with other mental health charities, with Mind in the UK, employment is at the centre of everything. It's at this centre of feeling needed and really having something to do and really having that story to tell with community, and it's on so many levels. So I love employment.
10 years ago, what was London doing that Australia wasn't?
So they knew they had nothing. It was off the base of Italy, and Italy was doing some really cool stuff. And it's like, how do we do this? How do we fire it up? And so they did what we're trying to do with White Box in Queensland at the moment, which is let's go and fund some entrepreneurs to succeed and fail. Failure in our sector isn't something that we celebrate very well, but failure is the thing that we'll learn from.
We're going to have to live with it.
This didn't work. And what I love about failure is, and we've all had failure here, right? Failure introduces us to this beautiful idea of something we never, ever want to repeat. But you need someone to give you that second shot. So we need the right way to learn from that.
Excellent. Louise?
Yeah, I suppose there's two parts to this story. There's one about the foundation of the mulberry project, which actually, it's called the mulberry project because it started underneath a mulberry tree. And I had a bumper crop in 2016, and I was inviting friends and friends of friends and friends and friends and friends of friends. And then one day there were some friends of friends, some African friends who came, and one of those men who was there had only arrived in Australia 6 weeks before from the Congo, having spent 16 years in a refugee camp. And anyway, so we started talking underneath the mulberry tree, and he said, Louise, you've got all this land, because we could speak in French. He doesn't speak English, but we could speak in French. We've got all this land. We really miss our vegetables. We can't get our vegetables. It's very expensive. We can't find them. We all really miss our vegetables. Could we grow some vegetables here? And so I said, yeah, let's do it. So that's literally how it happened. It was about displaced people who actually have profound connections to growing and preparing foods and just wanting somewhere to grow their food. And so that was a really beautiful story of displacement and almost like homecoming through growing. And in terms of my own personal story, my background, I was originally an architect and urban designer, an academic at the University of Queensland, and then 2001 I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So I had my own really significant challenges in terms of learning how to manage living with severe mental illness. In some ways I connect with that fragmented employment story or fragmented journey of displacement, because I had to let go of my career. I basically had to leave that profession because it wasn't, I couldn't stay well. And so I, amongst other things, began working for Ability Enterprises, which is the first social enterprise.
Toowoomba's first social enterprise.
Toowoomba's first social enterprise. So I've been working for Ability.
Yeah.
First. The boys at Metro.
There's been a few others, yeah. But the big one, first big one.
Yeah, the first big one, yeah.
Well, the first one where you had a big client. And
That's right.
We'll come to big
procurement,
cornerstone clients, but the Toowoomba Regional Council saw the value in social enterprise, so that was the first.
So that was the first step. So, I've been working part-time for Ability Enterprises. I call myself the door bitch at the tip. No. Gatehouse operator. So thou shalt pass or not pass.
It's an extraordinary power.
Yes, it is. It is. And that's been a wonderful, in terms of my journey to wellness, so that's actually been really powerful. And before I worked for Ability, I didn't even know what social enterprise was. So just over 2 years ago is when we founded the Mulberry Project, 2.5 years ago. And yeah, so I could sort of see the opportunities, having experienced myself how beneficial that can be, even part-time employment for someone who like has particular challenges, how important that can be in terms of, you know, your financial well-being, connection to community, all of those sorts of things. So yeah, as a group of us really saw the potential in our model, which is really creating futures for people through farming and food. So.
And we'll come back, we'll talk a little bit more about our individual projects a bit later too, because I think there's such a variety of projects that are underway, and we'll come back to that. Ali, your personal journey, when did you first hear of social enterprise, and tell us a little bit more of the why of your project?
The why? Well, Gladys is part of our family. So we've got strong connections with Papua New Guinea. Gladys herself made a lot of money out of New Guinea. A lot of people do. And I know that she doesn't want, it's almost like a spiritual connection. She doesn't want this to be a money-making thing. This is a gift back. Yep. So, but not a gift back as in just throwing a lump sum at a charity. YWAM Medical Ships is all about training the New Guinea nationals to run their own health services, to run their own ship, and to have a second ship and a third ship that can go to all these remote places and is totally run by them. So that really appealed to me, and I thought, God, you know, Gladys would really like this. She'd be very pleased. She was a nurse, she was a very pioneering kind of spirit, and so it's very important to me that this is not a profitable exercise for anyone particular, apart from maybe some investors. They might like some profit.
They'll need some return.
But for everything else, it's about making sure that some money goes back into those villages.
And you wanted to honour that memory and explore that experience?
Absolutely. And in addition to that, there's another sort of level to it, I suppose. You know, the invasion of Rabaul in 1942 was a horrific thing that we in Australia have turned a blind eye to. It was very badly managed. There are a lot of people died. I mean, there's over 1,000 young men died. And we don't really talk about it. And so this story is a hook. Gladys is that strong female lead that gives us a hook into telling that story.
Excellent. That's really interesting. We'll talk a bit more about that too. Now, Luke, you said a word that all of us know lots about, failure, and something that I've noticed in my 2 years in politics is that generally governments don't want to invest in failures. So one of the great problems that social enterprise has is minimising risk, trying to maximise the possibility of success. Now, there's never any real guarantee in that. I'm just wondering, I'll go to you first because you mentioned the word failure, and maybe you can also link in, you know, for the audience, perhaps describe a little bit more about social enterprise and as you see it, but also how to, because ultimately the market will decide social enterprise success or failure. However, governments do, I believe, have a role to play in assisting where possible to get them up and running, because this is one-off. These are one-off, often, payments that can lead to long-term. And certainly my experience at the laundry was a one-off government investment, and now it's self-sustaining. So maybe can you explore a little bit about failure, and also for the audience, talk a little bit about social enterprise as you see it?
So I think on a number of levels, like firstly, you know, everyone now talks about the success of Vanguard. And when are we going to get another Vanguard? And where will it be? And how will it work? And who's going to run it? And it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when and a little bit of how. But like, you know, as a community, we all saw how hard that was. Like that was 72 different funding partners. You know, and our next Vanguard will be something like 5 or 6 funding partners, and our next projects will be 5 or 6. But it's this whole success breeds success thing. And there's a lot of people out there thinking, well, if you're setting up a business, it shouldn't really be the role of government. But at the same time, it's like, well, I think the tricky thing for government supporting social enterprise is that, you know, as a politician, you want to cut things in your next 3 years' time.
Absolutely.
And it takes, you know, 12 months to do proper due diligence and then get the right community partnership. We've been trading 2 years this week at Vanguard, which is really exciting. But, you know, it's 2 years of a bit of cash burn, a bit of learning how to run laundry and all that sort of stuff. And it will take another 2 years to really get to where we want to be. So that's, you know, they take three, and I think everyone around this sofa will sort of acknowledge it's a 3 to 5 year journey. and one or two of us, you know, and it might be us, will not work out. We will have some failure in that. So it's those sort of cycles that really sort of, you know, I think struggle. So I think failure is going to happen. But back to the government question, you know, governments invest in businesses all the time. Governments give startup and innovation grants and all that sort of stuff, but they haven't done so in Queensland for a long time. So I get asked a lot of the time, why is New South Wales and Victoria so far ahead in social enterprise development? And the real answer is that as a state, we just haven't invested in that. We've invested heavily in the startup of small businesses, etc., but we haven't invested in social innovation. You know, I was looking at the Bloomberg Social Innovation Register this morning, and Australia's stepped back yet another spot to 19th after the UK. You know, we like learning from success and not taking that first step, and our politicians are sort of worried about how it will impact their further polls. Sorry, Dave, I'm not. You're excluded to that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, you know, I think, you know, it's up to ourselves, and you know, at Vanguard, we did get a sizable investment from the federal government's, you know, to kick off, but it was the community and a lot of other philanthropists and private investors that wanted really low returns to make that successful. So the risk has to come from, I find, an outside role of people.
Yeah. Jen, failure for you. What's been your experience with it? And also, you know, while we're talking about, you know, funding and often, you know, getting that funding is part of the failing sometimes. What's your experience been?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see failure as a negative thing. I see failure as a really positive step forward. And I agree with Luke. You know, we need to make it so the social entrepreneurs can try and fail, because that's how we learn what works and what doesn't.
Correct.
Emerge as an organisation has probably failed a million times already. And you know, we started off with an idea in a food van.
Yeah.
A lot of our funding, we call on the community to fund us. You know, we use the grassroots sort of thing to get funded, get small little projects inside Emerge funded. But the food van didn't work. It was a failure, and it was a failure because it wasn't enough. We found that the demand on us was too great, and the food van was never going to hold those kids. But it gave us a really good idea that the concept was great. It was just a little failure. Getting money is probably the biggest challenge that I find in social enterprise. Money and also time, volunteer time. You know, we find small businesses, the community, the little guys are our biggest backers in what we do. And again, I think government should look at that and listen to what the community wants. They're starting to learn more about social enterprise, and they want the government to back us too. So
yeah. And I look at a couple of you know, surprising little social enterprises that I learned about over the time was that KBH Enterprises, I know they've renamed now, but you know, just these surprising little social enterprises that pop up. So they did all the pegs for the second range crossing surveying. Now, not everybody has the luxury of a big cornerstone, you know, project like that. So part of that failing is, you know, volunteers, it's funding, it's getting that cornerstone client or that cornerstone project to build a social enterprise on. So.
Yeah. And, you know, for myself as a founder, I've spent, you know, the first 18 months, you know, on the ground not getting paid a wage, which is really hard, and that's passion. But I think providing that income for founders, for directors to really get things established, get to that 3 to 5 year mark is really important. Because, you know, it's hard. We need to pay our bills as well. But, definitely,
And Louise, your failures, I'd be interested to hear if you want to share them, because it's an interesting social enterprise that you're running in that I always say everybody expects Toowoomba and the Darling Downs to be quite a retired country town. And I take great pleasure in standing up in Queensland Parliament and reminding them that we're in fact one of the most diverse multicultural regions there are. So I've got a primary school in my electorate at Darling Heights that the kids there, half of them speak another language at home. So we've got a diversity here in Toowoomba and the Darling Downs. Tell us about your failures and also
Yeah.
challenges you faced
Yeah.
in that environment.
In this one, I think what I'd like to sort of, because I think we've been really brave, and I think that people that we're working with are really brave, like they're really resilient and creative, and they've also got a lot of skills. But what I find is the biggest failure is that the current sort of systems that are there to support job seekers fail them miserably. So to me, the biggest failure is the job network system, because it actually doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
But they've doubled their effectiveness over the last 12 months. They've gone from like 14% success rates to 28%. It's fantastic. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
It only cost $6 billion. Like,
Yeah, and so
there's some big money in that, isn't
I
there?
just get really angry because I can see it's frustrating, and in this process of trying to see, okay, well, where might there be funding that we could tap into? Sort of like talking to job networks and going, and I don't want to completely bag them, but there's all of these like structural failings in the system. Like we're working with a lot of women, so there's a lot of women because of their particularly if they're on a parenting payment, then they're actually considered to be what they call non-compulsory job seekers. So then there's no funding attached to them, even if they want to get a job. So we had an opportunity to actually link some of our members to employers with a training package that went with that. But because the job networks, because they're women, because they're on a parenting payment, so they're considered non-compulsory job seekers, there's no funding attached to them, so they couldn't participate in that training and they couldn't get work. And so that to me, that's the biggest failure, is like...
Now that's your experience of a job network. That is since you've been running the Mulberry Project, or... So you see I'm going to say this because I see it all the time, people coming into my office, Syrians, Pakistanis, Iranians looking for work, completely unable to find any. Job networks are a blunt instrument, a very blunt instrument.
Yeah. So I've had meetings with some of the job networks, and they'll go, okay, so these are people. There are some people who are quite competent. They're literate. They may not be great in English, but they're still literate.
And they're highly skilled.
Highly skilled. But then we also
skilled.
have people who have had no formal schooling whatsoever. And I spoke to a job network and I said, okay, well, what sort of support do you provide for these groups in order, for writing CVs? Because they can't apply for any job if they don't have a CV. And I was, it can't be that difficult to have, people supporting them making CVs. I said, well, what do you do for this group? Oh, no, well, that's, we run workshops. So they run like a CV writing workshop, and that's ticking the box. So that the job networks are actually getting funding to actually provide that service, and then so then we're getting, like, we've got volunteers and myself who are writing CVs for people, and then people who are registered with the job network, we're getting them employment.
And
I mean,
what did you say? Is that $6 billion? Was that just...
Government's going to spend $6 billion on supporting those agencies alone in the next 3 years, not to mention the $4 billion that they'll try and spend on subsidies and other support. So let's call it $10 billion that they're going to spend.
Over 3 years.
Yeah, over 3 years. There's 1% of the million job seekers that they'll get a job, in the next 3 years. And then the success rate of people getting to 26 weeks, and they've only just started monitoring to 52 weeks, is now 28% of people will still have a job. So it's like, it's just not working. But
that's a lot of failing.
But if we go back into the history of where it is, it was, back in the Howard days, and I think it was needed, and it was about outsourcing the Centrelink offices, and then it was like, they're doing a lot of red tape stuff at the same time, like checking that people are doing their paperwork and that sort of stuff, and it's like, can you get them to get a job? But it's just not, it's not effective.
It's not effective at all.
And you see people come into your office, and we have a standard wait list of 70 people that want a job at Vanguard all the time, people that are desperate for work, and it's like, well, how are we going to do it? And I think the big problem is our culture is structured around, well, let's get them a resume, let's run them in programs which actually cost a lot of money, and let's hope that there's a job at the end. And if we don't get a job at the end, like, the employers are going, well, I need them, the thing is, like, award rates, we have the highest award rates in the world. Yeah. $20 an hour. I mean, and I'm not saying
Can't live
that's...
on less than that. Like, I mean, you've also got to look at it from the perspective of a living wage. So, you know, I don't think it's a problem with the minimum. I don't think it's a problem with the minimum wage. I think we've got a big problem in terms of the transition to employment. So I think that's what, you know, Jen's working in that space. Vanguard does as well. Like, you know, and Clubhouse is a part of that. Do you know what I mean? Like, so Clubhouse is a foundation, Vanguard
Getting
is
the
the
skills.
next step, you know. And so that's really what we want to do at the Multi Project as well, is sort of like there's foundation, then there's sort of like, you know, sort of working in a traineeship type arrangement. So, because a lot of people actually, it's the soft skills that they don't have when they come, like, you know, people who've been displaced, cultural expectations of, you know, all of that.
But the issue of the employers, when I was at Clubhouse and, you know, going out and saying, will you give this person a job? One of the reasons I got so, you know, heartfelt into social enterprise and got back into it is employers would say, look, Luke, I'm paying $20 an hour. With on cost, that's $25 an hour. You know, when I was in the UK or whatever, it was half that, and other markets, even New Zealand, it's a lot lower. You know, then I've got some gap where I can play with training. So it's being put back onto us as a sector. So for me, what works is employment-focused social enterprise, where you start with a job and build the programs around that, as opposed to starting with a program and hoping there's a job at the end.
Because that's the problem. Like, you know, I've seen like some of our participants who have got like, you know, 2 or 3, you know, certificate 2 or even certificate 3, but no one in that process has even, you know, worked with them to write a resume at the end of that, and then there's been no transition to employment, like even like traineeships or volunteer work or anything. There's no transition. It's sort of like, okay, you finished your training, go and write your own CV, you know, go and look on Seek, you'll find a job. Do you know what I mean? So it's we're throwing people like worse than in the deep end. We're setting people up to fail.
Now, social enterprise is used as a vehicle for employment. Now, this is all about mental health. Now, a big thing for me getting personally involved with social enterprise was that opportunity to make a difference to long-term unemployed people, and in the Vanguard Laundry's instance, with mental health concerns. Now, whether it be homeless, people suffering mental ill health, whether it be our multicultural community, can you give me one example in all of your respective social enterprises where you have seen a quantifiable change to a person's mental health and general well-being? Jen, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I have to really think. I've got so many in the last 12 months. But one young lady that we're working with presented to us about 8 months ago down at the Youth Hub. She was engaged in one of our social programs, which is our boxing and fitness program. It was very evident the first time we met her that there'd been a lot of self-harm. She'd had scars from the top of her body to the bottom. She was very withdrawn. She was in the child safety system, and we do see a lot of kids that come from the child safety system. And they'd reported, you know, that obviously self-harm was a big one, lots of suicide attempts, not engaging with traditional psychologists and counsellors and other programs. And the first few weeks she just spent her time in the corner just listening in the program. By the end of 3 months she was up and doing boxing. Then we offered her the opportunity to do a traineeship at our small cafe in a retirement home that we run. And just yesterday, she's running that cafe, and into the future she'll be training more young people coming through our program. You know, I haven't spoken to her professional psychologists and things like that, but it is quite evident. She's happier, she's more confident, there's a belonging. We call Emerge as somewhere to call home. It's like home base, and then we can link them up with our hospitality enterprise. So that's just one young person, and I know I could give you another 6, 7 stories just off the top of my head, you know, from the same intake of kids. So,
And, you know, it rolls off the tongue always, the dignity of work. You know, but it's to individual humans that are struggling with mental ill health or yeah, it's more than words.
Yes.
It is that sense of belonging.
Yeah,
and
and I
purpose.
mean we're dealing with probably a much younger cohort than these guys are. So
Yep.
I work in homelessness, and I see the other end. Particularly women older than 50 who are homeless, living with lots of mental health issues, and I just think Emerge has a responsibility to work as an intervention. I find a lot of people have been in the system for a long time, and they get to an age where it's really hard to turn that around. So the more we do, the earlier we do it, the better.
Yeah, very good, thank you. And Luke, there are a number of stories. I remember at the opening of the laundry, one gentleman spoke as to his transformation really in his life.
Yeah, look, for Vanguard, I've only got 30 seconds, but like 100 people have started work at Vanguard, and we don't record their stories and what it means, and we're working with Swinburne Centre for Social Impact, that advises the Prime Minister's Office on Employment and those issues, and feeding into. We showed that in Toowoomba, when within 6 months of it opening, it saved $200,000 at the local mental health ward around reduced stays at the mental health ward. That smoking rates dropped in half simply by having a job. That and now we're measuring with a pharmaceutical benefits scheme and Centrelink and Queensland Health, and showing the impacts that it has on the previous 3 years and the current 3-year patch. The difference of getting a job to mental health is, sometimes the first thing to go when you have a mental health problem is work. We say, well, why don't you take a few days off work? The reality is when it comes to mental health and work, that if that person takes more than 90 days off work when they have a mental illness, there's something like only a 15% chance that they'll ever return back to work. So getting back to work and getting some form of work is really, really important. So the stories are endless, and every time we do that, every time that someone has an opportunity to have some choice back, it makes such a big difference. But I think it's important to acknowledge the hurdles of that as well. Like every time we start someone up, we can measure our efficiencies in the laundry versus other efficiencies, and those people that are coming in the workplace that have experience in workplace in the community and the skills to do that, and those that don't. And there is a 25% efficiency gap for the first 6 months, and that's why we need a bit of funding support, etc., to make that work. Because we are working with a workforce that hasn't worked long term, unemployed, and that's why traditional businesses aren't always giving that group of people their first go.
And I think it's promising that there is an evidence gathering exercise going on. So again, it'll assist governments in their decision making and investment decision making as to determine where is the best value for money. And I think that's promising to be measuring improvements in mental health and smoking rates, in hospital visits, so it's valuable research. Louise, you've probably got a myriad of stories of change, and I've met a couple of people when you brought your the Mulberry Project to Parliament House a couple of months ago. So.
Yeah, no, I've got a myriad of stories really, and many of them are very beautiful, but I think whether it be just working in the garden more as sort of being involved in community and working together in a purposeful activity, I think has huge benefits for everyone. Feeling connected to others, feeling connected to your environment, being able to share food, like all of those things actually have a great impact in terms of people's well-being.
Do you see in the multicultural community? Do you see high rates of depression or mental
high,
illness, or
huge.
what mental illness issues do you see?
Well, there's a lot of post-traumatic stress, like people who've experienced like really extreme forms of trauma, and that impacts people in very many ways. So, I've got a couple of examples. Like one Syrian fellow, and he was sort of like an older gentleman, and he had arrived in Toowoomba with his daughter. His other daughter and all his grandchildren are still displaced, basically in Iraq. His wife had died sort of shortly after they arrived in Toowoomba, so it was probably about 6 months after that he became involved in the garden, and it was his daughter who had spoken to me and said, look, my father loves gardening, but he's depressed, he's really, really depressed. And I just saw a huge difference in him over that time. He started off, he couldn't speak English, so we speak with mobile phones, like sort of show pictures to each other and all that type of stuff. But he was, every time I'd ring and speak to his daughter and say, okay, would your father like to come to the garden tomorrow? Does he need someone to pick him up? Yep. And then I'd get messages from them, are you coming to pick me up tomorrow? And, it was really lovely because everyone sort of shares a bit of whatever they've got sort of for lunch. And so he was like bringing food for us to share, Syrian food. And since that family have moved to Sydney, and he sent me a message the other day and he said, Louise, he said, I think that by mistake I'm not on that group where you're sending the messages about what's happening in the garden. Could you put me back on it? Like, even though he's in Sydney, he wants to be a part of it, even virtually. So, I mean, there's so many beautiful stories. Another Afghan lady who was severely tortured by the Taliban. And I rang her up and said, would you like to come to the garden tomorrow? She said, oh, no, I've got a doctor's appointment. She said, but she says, how are my eggplant? She says, how's my garden? Yeah. And so it's just that sense of ownership, belonging and agency that comes from being involved in a garden with others.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Ali, your project, it's dealing with a whole variety of
It is, and look, we're just at the seed funding stage, which is going well. So that's all quite good, and it's such a big project that encompasses a book, documentaries, and a feature film. But the story of Gladys, when we're talking mental health, this is what makes the story so incredible. I don't really know what made Gladys Gladys. She didn't have an easy childhood, but when the Japanese invaded New Guinea in 1942, what made her so tough? What made her able to help save the 240 soldiers when army officers crumbled, when men gave up and died? I don't know. And she never had post-traumatic stress. Gladys was just a machine, a very happy, lively machine that just could keep going. And I'm sure it's her childhood and her not easy life that somehow gave her this resilience. But when you talk about work, she always worked. As soon as she, after the escape, and there she was emaciated and all this, she went straight to find work. She never stayed at home feeling sorry for herself. Not that, there was no welfare back then for her, so she had to work. So her story is interesting in that regard too.
Fantastic. And I think we've probably sadly running out of time, but I wanted to ask one final question of you all. And I think if we've identified anything today, it has been the value of social enterprise in a suite of measures to tackle mental illness. So if we all acknowledge that having a job and a purpose is a vital part of good mental health, in your opinion then, what is the future for social enterprise? How can social enterprise lift more people out of mental illness? We know mental illness right across the community continues to expand, and as a community we need to pull on every lever we possibly can, and I think we've all got a bias that social enterprise is a valuable and vital role in that. But what do you see as the future for social enterprise tackling mental illness? Jen, I'll kick off with you.
I think, for governments and business and the private sector to keep supporting social enterprise, but also for private business to start developing their own social impacts, creating arms, I guess, within their companies to engage people who have got barriers, and calling on social entrepreneurs how they can make that happen, I guess.
That's good. So sort of a call to private sector. I sometimes think everybody expects the government to solve all the problems, and we all know that that's not possible.
No,
so I think big employers of people who, we're talking large communities. Some businesses might employ 10,000 people. So there is.
I do believe we're a village, and it is up to us to take care of one another. So, and obviously that Luke said before, the clients that we're working with, the people who are getting jobs, they obviously need a lot more support. And it's so looking at how business can make that flexible, not just for people who need employment, but all people. Maybe we need to reinvent what traditional employment looks like just to make it a little bit easier for people.
Yeah. Excellent. Luke?
We need three things. We need finance, we need big loans. We don't necessarily want grants. I mean, grants are helpful to get started in startup phase, but we need money that we're going to repay. But it's going to be not 7 to 17% business returns. It's going to be like 90-day swap rate stuff. It's going to be like 2%-ish. We're hiring people that have never worked before. We need to build their confidence up. Sometimes the only lever we can pull is finance. The second thing we need is contracts. We need courageous procurement people, which is normally a sentence where those combination of words don't come together. And courageous procurement people that are saying, yes, I'm going to give you a laundry contract, even though you've never washed any laundry before, at home or commercially. And then we need to support our leaders. And I think this is something that we can do as a state and as a country. Is at the moment there are only 10 large-scale social enterprises in Australia that are employing more than 50 people, especially targeting around mental health. And to do that, to scale and to do more in that space, we need to be supporting leaders and especially young leaders to say, there's another choice. And just like I was supported in the UK to be a young leader, to be able to go out and do, interesting stuff, to be a social entrepreneur instead of a publicly listed make more money entrepreneur. It's how we're going to support those guys and girls to make big impacts.
Excellent. Louise.
I suppose for
and
me,
I'm happy if you stick to a local level as well. Like and I'm thinking too, in terms of our community here about our diversity continues to grow. What do you see the future for even the Mulberry Project?
I see the future in terms of unleashing the beast being human potential and human creativity, because. And I think one of the issues is, say, with regards to mental illness, is actually seeing mental illness as something over here, whereas mental well-being, if we have sort of like a well-being approach, like really our well-being is determined by, housing, employment, all of those things. So if we can find ways to support communities to find their own solutions and actually actually trust people, rather than, I think a lot of systems currently are actually built on not trusting people. So giving people agency, creating opportunities for people to exercise agency and to create and to use their creativity to solve problems, I think that's the future for me.
I like it. That's good. And Ali, your future, so seed funding stage now, where to from here?
Well, then we go into some bigger investment levels. But what we've done with the seed funding is to take our investors on a little journey. It's not just about throwing money at something and seeing a profit. It's this journey that we're all on, and it's so much more fun and more satisfying. Newsletters and things like that, and ways that we can engage them, whether it's a day on set, whether it's dinner with the cast, whether it's to be an extra. We're working ways to involve them, to engage them, and I think investors, some of them, do quite like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your time and for your expertise and for different perspectives. We've all come at it slightly differently, and government's got a bit of a whack as well, so that's got to be good. But again, thank you for your time. Unleash the Beast has been a really worthwhile project, and as I said, we all have a bias towards social enterprise and the difference it can make. And I think there is a really bright future locally for social enterprise to tackle the challenges of mental illness in our communities, but right across Queensland and the nation. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.